You're 14, dragging a magnet on a rope through a junkyard, listening for the click of loose steel in the dirt. 30 years later, you run the melt shop at a mini mill and clear $150,000 a year. Between those two moments sits some of the strangest math in America. A new car is about 900 kilos of steel, somewhere between $700 and $900 of raw metal, and it sells for $48,000. The scrap you pulled out of that junkyard sells for around $350 a ton. The hot rolled coil that comes off the mill floor, the same iron melted and cast and rolled, sells for over $1,000. The mill pours the cheap end of that climb. Steel manufacturing will also burn you, crush you, or catch you in a machine, and the metal you work moves at 1,500 degrees, hot enough that a single drop of water near it turns into a bomb. The climb runs from a kid with a magnet and $0 to a man who decides whether 30 people go home with all their fingers. This is every level of a steel mill worker's career in America, and what it actually cost to climb. If you like breakdowns of how careers actually progress, like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Level 1, the magnet and the junkyard. You're 14 and you've never made $1 on metal. The whole operation costs nothing. A magnet off an old speaker, a length of rope, a wagon with one bad wheel. You drag the magnet across the dirt and it jumps and sticks, and you pry the steel loose and drop it in the wagon. Then you learn the part that pays. Not all metal is worth the same. You feel the weight of a chunk, and you guess copper, brass, aluminum, steel, and the scale at the yard tells you if you guessed right. The first dozen loads, you haul the wrong stuff, heavy iron that pays pennies, and you leave the bright copper buried because you didn't know to look. Then you learn to read it. You learn a magnet won't grab copper or aluminum, that the metal that doesn't stick is the metal that pays. You strip wire with a knife. You pull the steel out of an old engine block with your hands. You cut your palm on a torn fender and wrap it in a rag, and keep going. You sell your first wagon load to the scrapyard for a few dollars a load. You start keeping the copper separate in a coffee can. The yard smells like rust and motor oil. The metal is cold. None of it pays much. And that's the problem. The wagon isn't enough anymore. You want a real check, so you take the only paid job a kid can get near steel, the bottom of the labor pool. Level 2, the labor pool. You're 18 with your first real paycheck job. $18 an hour at the bottom of a steel mill. More on the nights and the weekends. And there are always nights and weekends. You pull on a hard hat, steel-toed boots, a face shield, and fire-resistant greens, and you take the jobs nobody with seniority will touch. You're a billet conditioner. You stand over a still warm bar of steel with a scarfing torch and a grinder, burning the cracks and seams off the surface before it moves down the line. You break up cold scrap with a jackhammer. You shovel mill scale, the black flaked iron that comes off everything, out from under the rollers. You sweep a floor that is never clean. You load the scrap buckets that feed the furnace, and then you do it again, 12 hours at a stretch, on a shift that rotates so your body never learns what time it is. The heat comes off the steel in a wall you walk into. Half the crew hired with you is gone inside a month. You slow down and the bars stack up behind you, and the turn foreman is watching from the pulpit. So you find the rhythm, the torch, and the grinder moving without you thinking, and the line stops backing up on you. You stop flinching at the sparks. Your first real check clears, and it's more than the wagon ever made. But the labor pool is the floor, and you can watch the money go past you, up the steps to the melt shop where the metal actually gets made. You want to be up there, so you take the worst job it has, the greenhorn. Level 3, the greenhorn. You're 20, the lowest hand in the melt shop. The pay steps up to around $23 an hour with a differential on the night turn. But the money isn't the point yet. The point is they let you near the furnace. A mini mill runs on an electric arc furnace, a steel shell the size of a room with 3 carbon electrodes that drop into a pile of scrap and pull an arc hot enough to turn it all to liquid. When it taps, it pours a stream of steel at 3,000 degrees. When Ken Iverson built the first one of these in rural South Carolina, he hired sharecroppers and carpenters and school teachers, men who had never seen the inside of a mill. And the first time the furnace was tapped and the molten steel ran out in front of them, every one of them turned and bolted from the building. You learn not to bolt. You charge the furnace, swinging a bucket of cold scrap up over the shell and dropping it in. You rake slag, you shovel the spill, you hump bags of alloy and lime up onto the platform. You stand on a catwalk over a vessel of liquid metal, and you learn where to put your feet and where never to put them. You work the night turn on a 2-2-3 rotation, 2 days, 2 nights, 3 off, then it flips, and your sleep never catches up. The set never changes. Charge, melt, tap, slag off, patch the lining, charge again. And then comes the shift that tells you whether you have a career. You're raking slag off the tap, and a runner clogs, and someone behind you swings the ladle before you've cleared the spout. The metal kicks. A gout of slag comes off the lip and lands where your boot was a half second before. Somebody grabs your collar and hauls you back. You keep both legs, and you finish the heat with a scorch mark on your bib instead of a burn down to the bone. You stop sleeping badly on the nights, and you can't say which week it stopped. They move you off the shovel and onto a control, and the control is where the work turns dangerous in a different way. Level 4, the operator. You're 26, and you've earned a turn on the equipment. The greenhorn raking slag beside you takes home what a laborer takes home. An operator running the caster on incentive takes home half again as much, because now a mistake costs more than a sweep of the floor. You run the continuous caster, where the liquid steel pours out of the ladle into a mold and comes out the bottom as a glowing strand, and you keep the level right so the strand never breaks. Or you run the furnace controls, dropping the electrodes, reading the power, calling for scrap. There's a rule here you learn once and never forget. Keep water away from the metal, not near it, away from it. A few drops of water under a ladle of molten steel flashes to steam and expands 1,600 times in an instant, and it throws tons of liquid metal across the floor. A wet scrap bucket, a leaking cooling line, a damp sample spoon, any of them will do it. The old hands tell you about the trainee prank, dipping a man's sample spoon in water so it spits when he goes to take a reading. And they tell it as a warning, because the spit is the small version of the thing that levels a building. Here's the part nobody tells you in the labor pool. The people who die in this trade are usually the ones who are good at it. The new hand stands back from the rail. The man with 15 years stands at the lip of the ladle, close to the metal, because that's where the skilled work is, and the metal doesn't care how long you've done it. You stop walking the long way around the pit. You read a heat by its color and call it before the gauge does. The melter checks your call. You're right. He stops checking. The crew starts running your numbers instead of waiting on his. You clear more than you ever have, and they hand you the heat itself. Soon, you're not running a machine on the floor. You're running the furnace. Level 5, the melter. You're 32, and the furnace is yours for the turn. The pay starts somewhere near 68,000 on paper, but that number is a floor, not a ceiling. Because a mill like Nucor pays you a bonus on every good ton, your crew pours week after week. And a melter who runs a clean furnace clears 6 figures without anyone calling it remarkable. Now you call the heat. You read the chemistry off the lab and decide what the bath needs. A shot of carbon, a charge of alloy, more lime to carry the slag. You decide when it's ready to tap and when it has to cook another 4 minutes while the whole line waits on you. You watch the power and the electrodes and the lining, because the lining is what stands between 3,000 degrees and the men on the floor. And you know to the heat how much life it has left. The test comes when a charge goes wrong. The scrap runs cold, the chemistry is off, the temperature won't climb, and the caster downstream is screaming for steel you don't have yet. A green operator freezes at the panel. You take it yourself. You hold the tap, you add the heat, you bring the bath up clean, and you pour a good ladle while half the shift was sure you'd lose it. You stop calling the turn foreman before you make the decision. The crew on the floor doesn't watch the furnace anymore. They watch you. You sign off on heat after heat with your initials in the log. You can run any furnace in this building, but you don't run the building. That's the next step up, and it's the one that stops being about steel. Level 6, the turn foreman. You're 38, and you finally get the promotion at the top of this trade. It isn't really a raise, it's a weight. The pay goes salaried 130, 150,000, and the day they hand it to you, you stop running the furnace and start running the people who do. You sit over the whole melt shop now, the furnace, the ladle, the caster, the crews on every turn. You decide who works the lip of the ladle and who isn't ready. You read the maintenance data and pull a ladle out of service before the lining fails, instead of after. You answer for the tonnage, the quality, the cost, and the 30 people on the floor under 3,000 degrees of liquid metal. Ken Iverson, a metallurgist who hated everything about big steel, built Nucor on a single bet that ordinary people, the sharecroppers and carpenters who bolted from his first furnace, could be trusted with the metal if you paid them right and got out of their way. You are the proof of that bet, the kid with the magnet standing at the top of the shop. The test is the worst night. A ladle runs out, or a furnace blows back, or a green hand freezes at the rail with metal coming. You don't get to run. You call it, you pull your people clear, you eat the lost heat, and at the end of the turn, every one of them walks out the gate. That's the job. The mill trusts you with the furnace and the men, and you bring all of them back. Look at what the climb actually bought, not an asset you own. The mill is the company's, the furnace is the company's. The steel is sold before it cools. What's yours is the trust. 30 people work in front of liquid metal because they believe you won't let it touch them. That's worth more than any single ton you ever poured. There's a kid in a junkyard with a magnet on a rope, dragging it through the dirt, waiting for the click of loose steel. You had the same two things 30 years ago and $0. The difference between that kid and you is a melt shop full of people who walk out the gate every morning because of how you run it. And you remember the exact weight of that first wagon load. Your hands don't fully open in the cold anymore. 30 years over the furnace did that. You wouldn't give back a single heat. The scrap that kid is loading sells for around $350 a ton, the same as it did when you pulled it out of the same dirt. Somewhere on a road right now, the steel you poured is rolling down a highway inside 10,000 cars, each one worth more than a year of your early pay, and you stopped doing that math a long time ago. The kid drags the magnet wrong, across the bright metal that doesn't stick, and walks right past the copper that pays. He'll learn to read it. You watch him haul the wagon to the scale and wait to hear what it weighs. And the furnace, charged and tapped and poured 1,000 times over, runs hot behind you on the same floor. You've worked your whole life.